Hi there and welcome to the third episode of 70 Years of Rock Guitar. In this episode we'll take a look at rhythm guitar from the 1960s. And as always, you can download a very detailed and helpful step-by-step guide with all the tab and practice tips for free if you click on the link in the video description or the first pinned comment. During the early 1960s, rock music made a huge leap forward thanks to amazing bands like the Beatles, the Byrds, the Kinks, and the Beach Boys. While in the 1950s, many rock songs were still influenced by the blues with its classic 12-bar structure, musicians in the 1960s began to experiment with harmonies, song structures, and sounds. Bands like the Beatles moved away from pure blues or rock and roll formulas and developed complete new song structures with pre-choruses, bridges, and modulations. Songs became more versatile, emotional, and musically complex. The Byrds introduced folk and jangle pop elements into rock music with their iconic 12-string Rickenbacker sound, while the Beach Boys set entirely new standards in pop and rock music with their multi-part vocal harmonies and complex harmonic progressions. So this era wasn't just the beginning of modern rock sounds, it was also the moment when rhythm guitar became much more than just accompaniment. It really turned into a driving creative force in songwriting. And shortly after, bands like the Kinks and towards the end of the decade, bands like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath laid the blueprint for hard rock and early metal in the 1970s with their heavier riffs. So today I prepared two fairly simple examples, one from the Beatles, one from the Kinks, and then a slightly more challenging one from the #1 innovator of the decade, Mr. Jimi Hendrix. But before we dive into the specific examples, let's take a quick look at the technical development of guitar gear, because that also had a huge impact on how rhythm guitar sounded and was played in the 1960s. In the 1950s, most guitarists' gear was still fairly simple. Small tube amps with barely any distortion, for instance, usually very clean sounds, and basically no effects, except for a spring reverb here and there or the built-in tremolo in some amps. I've already discussed this in detail in episode #1, which you can now find linked above here. So at the beginning of the 1960s, this began to change fundamentally. Amps became more louder and powerful. Brands like Vox and later Marshall developed amps that offered more saturation and more natural tube distortion. So many bands cranked their amps all the way up to get that gritty and more aggressive sound. This raw tone you hear from bands like the Kinks or the Who didn't come from distortion pedals, it was pure tube overdrive coming straight from the amps. And as the decade went on, the first effect pedals also hit the market. Like for instance the fuzz phase, used often by Mr. Jimi Hendrix, came out in 1966, followed by the first wah pedals, treble boosters, and tape delays. And all of that opened up new possibilities for guitarists. Rhythm guitar was no longer all about just backing chords, it could now sound characterful, aggressive, dreamy, or even explosive. If you happen to have a Kemper or any other modeler, feel free to search for amps like the Marshall 100-watt Super Lead from that era or a Vox AC30, but always remember to not use too much distortion. Alright, so let's move on to our first example. I've chosen the Beatles song Here Comes the Sun because it features a very important rhythm guitar technique, a tasteful blend of picking and strumming. Pay attention to the right combination of upstrokes and downstrokes so that you'll eventually be able to play the part both smoothly and quickly. I've included all the picking directions in the tablature for you. I'll first play the example slowly and then at full speed. Now let's take a look at how it might sound when you've incorporated this kind of playing into your own style. This is one of my very first original songs called Motions of Shadows, which I released with my old band Cunning Mantrap in 2015. I didn't get this technique directly from the Beatles, but it's exactly the same approach. This style of playing isn't just great for ballads, it also works well in breakdowns or quieter parts of otherwise heavier songs. And you can even find it in modern metal today. As the next example, let's take a look at one of the very first hard rock riffs ever, You Really Got Me by the Kinks. This riff is made up of simple power chords, first alternating between F5 and G5 and later between G5 and A5. Once again, pay attention to the picking direction. It's a good idea to use a downstroke on the first beat of each new bar and then switch to consistent alternate picking. And finally, I've prepared the bridge part from Jimi Hendrix's May This Be Love, because Hendrix was able, like no one before him, to combine rhythm and lead in a unique way. In this example, Hendrix mostly uses some very cool chord inversions where he takes a major chord, or sometimes a power chord used in place of a major chord, and plays it like this. Do a slide from the major second to the major third, and then use your index finger to play the fifth octave and occasionally the octave of the major third. So you go from here to here. This lets you add some flavor to even fairly common chord progressions. I've adopted this technique and also applied it to minor chords, which sounds like this. But now here's May This Be Love, first played a little slower and then in its original tempo. And that's it for this episode. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel to help the channel grow. In the next episode, we'll take a closer look at lead and solo guitar from the 1960s. Until then, have fun practicing and playing these examples here, and then I'll see you next time.